Chapter 47. The instrument carriers wait till Monday to go back to Mr. Bryant's and pick up the sector. Not so bad so far, do you think? Robert Farlow, who is driving the empty wagon, remarks to Thomas Hickman beside him. Not bad for fields we've all worked in forever. Hickman, who is receiving a shilling more than Farlow this week, bears a worried look. The other 6-shilling man, Matt Marine, took himself off up the bridge road sometime in the dark and hasn't been seen since, leaving it upon Hickman's shoulders to make sure no harm comes to the sector. Behind them, back in the dust and wood smoke, the ringing of axe bits diminishes with distance. John Harland and John Hannings and Kit Myers recline in the wagon bed among the cushions for the sector, the ragged breeze of their progress bringing them the pleasant scents of the springtide as they roll along the Newcastle Road 2 to 3 miles south of the line and roughly parallel to it. Overhead, birds carry twigs to secret destinations. Beside the road, children come running to stare, caps askew, forks and churns left to lie. Farmers in wagons coming the other way wave, or sometimes, knowing who they are, glare. Each time they set out slightly to the north of west, upon a bearing that will describe 10 minutes of great circle before intersecting again the true west line. The gentlemen know from calculation that the angle to be turned off must be 0 degrees, 8 feet, 18 inches to the northward of perfect west. For a while they take sky observations to confirm this, Dixon as if in deference to Mason as astronomer, but presently they are turning the angle directly from the plate of the instrument, a surveyor's habit that Dixon may feel more comfortable with, which they drift wordlessly into, beginning to learn, each at his own rate, that the choice not to dispute oftentimes sets free minutes, indeed hours, otherwise wasted in issueless quarrelling. Neither appreciates this at the time. When they reach the end of each 12-mile or so segment, they stop and set up the sector to find the distances in degrees of several stars, at their highest points in the night from the zenith. Bradley's star catalogue gives the declination or celestial latitude for each star. This value plus the zenith distance equals the earthly latitude of the observing point. Pretty obvious. Owing to the error in taking bearings that ever accompanies the running of a real arc upon the not quite perfectly spherical earth, the sector will never be set up exactly in the latitude of the true line. So offsets are figured at each mile, ranging from 0 at the eastern end to whatever the difference in latitude might prove to be at the other. These offsets must then be added to the purely geometrical differences at each mile between the 10 minutes of the great circle actually run and its chord, the line itself, each time increasing from 0 to about 21 feet at the halfway point, then decreasing again to 0. As Fortune had put their first 10 minutes of arc close behind Octarara Road, so does their next stage west allow them to set up the sector but 26 chains short of the east bank of Susquehanna, a mile and a half of taverns strung near and nearer along the way up to the Peach Bottom ferry. On Sunday the 12th of May they begin their zenith obs again, continuing them till the 29th. It will be a brisk and pleasant fortnight beside the broad river, which dashes and rolls round two small islands directly in the line of the Visto. On days of cloud they endeavour to project the line across the river, whose breadth they take the occasion to compute, though the task falls mostly to Dixon, being, as Mason informs everyone, more surveyor's work, really. Dixon and Mr. McLean, along with Darby and Cope, go trudging down the river to have a look. Common practice would be to measure out a baseline upon the further bank, set up there, turn off 90 degrees, put a mark on the near side, come back across, set up at the mark there, and find the angle between the two ends of the baseline. Then, with the aid of a book of logarithms, including those of trig functions, 'twould take but a minute and a half of adding and checking to find the distance across the river. That's how we learned it in Durham, Dixon recalls, to measure across places we'd rather not go. Not so much rivers, of course, as unexpected patches, sudden entire ranges of spoil heaps, or a grove out in an empty fell. Certainly nowhere near this damned many trees. I've found little joy in these situations, offers Mr. McLean, whilst Darby and Cope nod at one another, silent as understudies in the wings, moving their lips no more than necessary. Sweating and muttering, all go tramping up and down the bank, kicking up clouds of gnats, crushing wild herbs in blossom, seeking a line of sight that will allow them to use a right angle, a fool's errand as it proves. At length, we'll have to use what angles we can then, that bonny with everyone. And more than soon enough for the chainmen, though Mr. McLean is shaking his head. I never get the figures right. Then let us prevail somehow upon Mr. Mason to review our computing, angles being the same, so I surmise, down here as out there. Mr. McLean takes over the 18-inch Hadleys, and Dixon repeats his sights with the circumferenter, obtaining at last an ungainly oblique triangle, from which they calculate Susquehanna to be about 7/8 of a mile across. To Mason, meanwhile, has fallen the task of projecting the line across the river and setting upon its western bank a point they might take up from again. Upon their last Saturday in Susquehanna, he writes, "About sunset I was returning from the other side of the river, and at the distance of about 1.5 mile the lightning fell in perpendicular streaks, about a foot in breadth to appearance, from the cloud to the ground. This was the first lightning I ever saw, and streaks continued without the least break through the whole, all the way from the cloud to the horizon." Less formally, he comes running, screaming into Dixon's tent, just as Dixon is lighting his evening pipe. "Did you see that?" "Bright as day," Dixon nods. "Lord, into what suburb satanic hast thou introduced me this time? Thy procedures not to be questioned, of course." The wind has begun to shake the tents. The surveyors hear the stumbling of raindrops against the taut duck. Their candle flames are being torn to shining waxen wildflowers. "I am assuming that I may be confident of my safety here," Dixon puffing. "The entire issue of lightning in America having been resolved by your friend Dr. Franklin, who draws it off at will, easy as drawing ale from a cask. Have got that correct, haven't I? 'Tis certainly the right place for lightning, eh? Nothing like this in Staindrop. Lord O'Frey did claim to have been hit once over by Low Dinsdale, but there were no other witnesses. Dixon, our lives are in danger. Hardly enough to interrupt a perfectly good. Here he is silenced by an immense thunderbolt from directly overhead as their frail prism is bleached in unholy light. Saturday night for, is it, I ask you? His head emerging at last from beneath a blanket. Mason, say, Mason, are the... Mason, now outside, pushes aside the tent flap with his head, but does not enter. Dixon, I will now seek shelter beneath that wagon out there. Do you see it? If you wish to join me, there's room. Interesting. Up to you, of course. Another great blinding peal. When Dixon can see again, Mason has withdrawn. Each lightning stroke, another step across the landscape, the miles-high electrical insect whose footfalls are thunderclaps, proceeds at some broken, incomprehensible pace, passing on toward Philadelphia and the sea, and the sky is restored to its pitiless clarity, in time to obtain a good zenith distance for Capella. Their latest orders, galloped in by express, are to return to the tangent point and run the 3.5 miles of meridian, or North Line, needed to close the boundaries of the lower counties. A line must now be drawn northward, from the tangent point, till striking the west line at right angles, thus defining the northeast corner of Maryland. To obtain their last 5 miles of boundary, the parties have agreed, as if repenting close to the end of a long life of error, to draw the line at last due north and south. Esteemed Murray, whatever else happens upon this expedition, I am getting to meet an uncommon lot of milkmaids. Every morning and evening they line up among the tents in the canvas alleyways, clanking pails and kettles and whispering among themselves, and laughing. Laughter at the outset of the day. Some are lovely beyond the pen of this wretched apprentice. Some, but even apprentice must refrain from comparison. Gladly would I welcome attention from any of them. Alas, what am I to do? Whilst, for their own part, the lasses, often quite brazen about it, go on thinning the milk with well water, putting in snails to make it froth, keeping it warm who knows how, coy milkmaids being a game courtly as any back in the metropolis, and like dancing, exercised with ease and enjoyment upon both sides. 'Tis cream-pot love in the morning dew, again at the close of day. One creeps about like a spider who might covet some curds and whey. For 'tis dairy, oh give me that dairy, the length that I'd go to for its sake are extraordinary. The step, you see, like this, and I see a cow and just drool, act like a fool, any time a cheese roll by, butter and milk, foods of that ilk, make me shake my head, going me oh my. Polly's in the penthouse, Molly's in the mood, everybody looking for that lactic food. Oh dairy, those seasons may vary, I'll but ever be very enchanted by you. In the midst of teaching a long queue of fair purveyors the steps of a real current in Williamsburg, young Nath is abruptly smit. Miracle! After miserable nights and roadside hovels styled inns, the companionless sunsets turn after planets turn, the days of regarding daughters and even wives of settlers with what I once imagined a soulful gaze, not always distinguishable by she that received it from an offensive stare, unexpectedly to find in the day's first dew, with the light increasing so swiftly, apt any instant to reveal in her that decisive flaw the crepuscule had hidden, though steadfast beneath the light she but grew more fair, her whom I call Galactica, for she is one of the purveyors to this expedition of dairy products. Poe, I can hear you, another tale of cream pot love, while I, of course, as who has not practised it in this Edenic dairy land, though Galactica be in that larcenous sisterhood not truly of it. What I'm in is a sailor's predicament. Far too soon must we extend the line past any journey she can make in safety, or indeed find the time for. There is no question of her joining our caravan. Her duty here is as compelling as would be my own were she to come, to deflect from her person the attentions of up to 100 men, including the implacable Stig. So must I beseech her wait till winter, when we leave off and return eastward, then until we head west again in the spring, and so on. Moments too few and the waiting too heavy a burden, I fear, upon fair Galactica. For though I know next to nothing about the sex, yet it seems in my experience that their reputation for patience is gravely overblown, and the faithful sailor's sweetheart of song and romance as mythical as a mermaid. End of chapter.